you were there in the Browzwear early days, like baby Browzwear.
Every time that we had a training, we would ask people, what are the things that are working? What are the things that are not working? What do you wish you could do with the software? The more you can learn about the pattern making part, even if it's not 3D and all flashy and all shiny, it's always important to go back and learn, even if it's basics.
Pattern making knowledge is probably precedent to your ability to make your model in 3D,
Yes,
something that's
absolutely.
like usable.
Let's talk about the cons, like the bad things first.
Sofia has a good trick with her illustrations and how she uses them. Hello, welcome to Underdressed, the podcast where we talk about the clothes under our clothes and exactly how they get made. My name is Trudy Gardner. I'm the freelance designer behind Wayfinder Lingerie. In this show, I'll be exploring the art, practice, and technical execution of intimate apparel. We'll be taking a behind-the-scenes look at this industry and trying to understand exactly how designers balance creativity with functionality, specifically as it pertains to our hardworking yet delicate base layers. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the show. All right. Hello. Welcome, Lisha, and welcome back, Sofia. Last week we had Sofia on the podcast, so our listeners should know a lot about you already, but we'll give you a quick introduction anyways. Sofia, the beautiful Sofia, is a pattern maker, freelancer, and she's had her own brand. And we also have Lisha Sanders, who I briefly mentioned you last week when Sofia and I were doing our podcast, Lisha, that we would be doing this topic this week. I was excited to get you both on because we are all 3D enthusiasts. And Sofia and I have been talking about it for a long time. Sofia and I have done a few podcasts already where we talk about how we're using Clo3D, but Lisha, we were particularly interested in getting your perspective because you've been using Browzwear and Sofia and I have mostly been using Clo3D. So, Lisha, you have your own brand of sewing patterns, Stitch Love Studio, and we'll make sure we give the link. And I'm gonna give you a chance to talk about a little bit exactly about what you do with Stitch Love. And I'd like to also hear about your history with Browzwear, and because you've been in it for a long time. This is part of the reason why I was super excited to get you on the podcast because you have some pretty deep roots. So why don't I give you a chance? Why don't I stop talking and give you a chance to introduce yourself, Lisha?
Oh, hello. I'm Lisha Sanders, and as Trudy mentioned, I have been in the industry for a long time. I started actually as a technical designer in the industry. The first job, actually, I didn't even know what a technical designer was, and I just took it anyways because it had the word design in the title. So I figured, yes, I graduated from the university in fashion design, and I decided to go in that path. And after over 20 years, in 2016, I actually saw a demo from Browzwear. I was in a company, in a corporation, and there was this demo that was gonna be happening, and I wasn't even invited. That was one of those things, right? Like you're in the right place at the right time. And the VP goes, "Hey, do you want to come to this meeting?" I was like, "Yes, absolutely. I would do anything not to be in my cubicle." And then when I saw it, I was just so impressed with the technology back then. It was like Browser 7.0 maybe, and it was impressive. It was, how can you get real patents and 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 have a real size avatar and actually dress it and make a garment from that and export the pattern, and it was incredible. I have my jaw completely open, and I was looking around in the room and nobody, I guess some people were very stressed out and they were not saying anything, but I was impressed. And then I left the company, and then I called Browzwear, one of the owners, and I talked with them, and they were super helpful, super kind, and we talked about the possibility of being a trainer with them. There was only one other person, a manager, and we started basically growing the clients, and people started understanding the benefits of 3D, and I started training, creating materials for the trainings, and working a little bit on support, working a little bit on everything, because the company was growing and growing and growing actually pretty fast.
Okay, so interesting. So you were hired as a trainer right off the bat. So you were never like working in a company that was using Browzwear in their
No,
processes.
it
Okay,
didn't
interesting.
exist. It
Okay, it
was
didn't
only
exist.
at
Yeah.
that point. It was just Nike and Adidas
Yeah.
who were using Browzwear, and to me, it was a very interesting journey to learn something new, and to me, it was the future now.
Yeah. Yeah, there was 27, what did you say? 2016. So that was like a while ago now, and there's been a huge, like so much progress made. What if you like knowing what you know now about 3D design, and if you saw like what you saw in 2016, do you think you still would be impressed with what you saw compared to like, what we have now? My point is it's come a long way.
It has changed a lot, and I was actually pretty happy that I started back then, because technically there were less features, there were less tools. So as they created new tools, new features in the software, I would have to just learn that one. So my learning process was super easy, and of course we got training from the programmers, so it was a very different uh, training for trainers, because you're getting the trainer from the programmers, and then it's a very different view of how things work, and they were very technical, and they talk
Yeah.
about the background
Oh,
and
that's
how
so
they
interesting. So you were learning the program from the programmers and then applying your pattern drafting knowledge to the program so that it could be used effectively by the industry.
correct.
Oh,
Yes, and then I
interesting.
got to they had two programs actually, Teacher, which is used for creating a garment from the beginning. Like you import the patterns or you create the patterns, and then you build the pattern on the avatar, etc. And then they have Lota, which is mostly geared to designers. Basically, you start from a garment that is already built, and then you can change the color, change the design, change a lot of things, but you're not really changing the pattern itself.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't really know what the difference between those were. So I know like often V-Stitcher is what's compared to Clo in that you can take a pattern, drape it in 3D and see what, if you make pattern changes, you can see what the pattern changes are. But Loda is just, you're not really doing any pattern drafting. It's just like changing textures, fabrics, colors, those kinds of things. Okay, interesting. Why do they have a
Correct.
separate program for that? Is it a little bit easier to use Loda?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about the technical design world and the design world, um, technical designers are very protective of their blocks, of their patterns, of their the way to do corrections, right? And
Ah,
designers sometimes want to do that, but they don't necessarily know exactly how, even though they think they do. And
mm.
this is not to offend anybody, but it's usually what happens. It's you have to have certain level of knowledge of pattern making to be able to transform or change a fit correction, apply a fit correction to the pattern. And this was made so designers wouldn't have to worry about changing the patterns. They will have, let's say, colorways in, they could create all the colorways they wanted. They still can do some changes, but basic, like
Mm.
length nowadays.
Okay.
Length, some changes depending on the type of garments that you start from. There are a lot of garments now in a library where you can uh, start from a garment in Lota that is already made, but you're not really able to change the pattern itself,
Okay,
if
there's
that
just a
makes sense.
limitation. You have some control over how you can change the pattern, but there's a limitation. Like anything that's going to change the fit drastically, you probably just don't have access to.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. Um,
I have a
okay,
question for you,
go.
Lisha. Um, you were there in the Browzwear early days, like baby Browzwear, and you have seen like the behind the scenes of that. So were there a lot of technical designers or pattern makers like involved in the creation of the software? Because a lot of people said that usually designers prefer Clo3D and pattern makers, technical designers prefer Browzwear. And that makes me think that maybe when they were actually implementing this feature, like for example, this separation between the design part of the software and the pattern making part, maybe they had a lot more input from like fashion industry people compared to Clo. I don't know. So
Yes. So what I know is that Lota was created with a lot of input from a designer, which actually her name was Lota, is Lota, and that's why they named the software after her. This teacher is it's a compilation of input from users. Every time that we had a training, we would ask people, what are the things that are working? What are the things that are not working? What do you wish you could do with the software? And we would gather all that information and pass it to the programmers. The manager that was at the moment, that still there, by the way, the manager that was there comes from a technical design background, and I came from a technical design background. So we actually had a lot of input as well on what are the things that people would like to do and why. Understanding why, to me, is a very important point, because when I was training technical designers, I knew exactly why they were asking certain questions, why they needed slash and spread, why they needed to walk a pattern, why they needed certain things. Versus if I am a trainer who only knows how to use the tool as pushing buttons, then I may not know why these people were asking for certain things. So the understanding of certain features that were required and needed is exactly what made Browzwear what it is, because they were really good at listening to users. So we always had a list of information to pass to the programmers to say, hey, how about this? Of course, the list got so big that then they had to prioritize, but that's how they usually work. I don't know much about Clo3D. I don't know how they work, but that's what we did for many years.
yeah, that's so interesting. And also it's so good that the trainers like you that were like training other people into the software had a fashion background, because I think that is a bit missing in the Clo people. Like, I don't know if this is always the case, but I went to the Clo3D advanced training for Europe. Like, I think it was in like around September. It was online, and almost everyone, like from the training people, like the teachers, none of them were pattern makers, designers. Maybe I think one of them was like, and the way they explain things didn't make a lot of sense for like the people who are actually using the software. So that made me a bit why?
I completely understand. And the thing is that it's something that the people who are not in the industry in that way would understand why it is so important. It's a conversation that is more between people who are in the industry and people who come from the pattern making, technical design background, that understand that. And that's my personal opinion as well. It's really not that you have to be an expert in pattern making, but to me, 3D is a tool that you use to obtain the results that you're used to obtain in a different, slower way. So you're using this tool to get to that point, versus, oh, this is a new toy, let me play with it and let me make it look good. This may or may not be a production pattern. This may or may not be a good pattern. It may not be balanced. It might be showing all of these things in the avatar, but you can tell the difference between somebody who really knows pattern making and how to make a garment look good, fit good, and a person who's not. So I think that it's a matter of going back and really understand that the more you can learn about the pattern making part, even if it's not 3D and all flashy and all shiny, like a 3D garment it's gonna look like, it's always important to go back and learn, even if it's basics, because it's gonna help you also understand how to sew the pattern, how to stitch it, right? Like how to finalize it, where there should be elastic, where there should be non-stretch fabrics, where there should be all of these things. And especially you guys who are specialized in intimates, you know that there are certain fabrics that are going to go in certain places. Even if the avatar is not showing that, you know, the final garment will need uh, all these special materials to make it work. And it may not be necessary on 3D, but if you use that pattern for production, you will see the difference.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to look at the background of these two companies as well. Clo3D comes from Marvelous Designer, which comes from the gaming world, right? Like Marvelous Designer was created to develop clothing for gaming characters. And then out of that grew Clo3D, which has been applied to the fashion world. And V-Stitcher came out of Browzwear. Is that right? V-Stitcher came out of Browzwear, which was already had like a pattern drafting. They have like another separate pattern drafting program as well. Is that correct? Or was it always V-Stitcher? It was always V-Stitcher.
I'm not quite sure. I think it was
Yeah.
always V-Stitcher.
But in any case, it comes from the industry, the pattern, like it grew out of the need of the industry to create patterns that were digital and could be applied to a 3D space.
Right. It was always the focus to apply it to the fashion industry, to the point that they didn't have any options for accessories or shoes or anything else. It was so geared towards the doing one thing and doing it right. Is the way I see it. And their simulation is extremely accurate. I have tested it myself. I have Albanon dress forms, and I also have the avatars Albanon dress forms, and I have actually compared it myself. Wherever you see a fit issue, you're gonna see it in 3D, and it's helpful. I want to see those things, but that's the difference too. It depends on what you're using 3D for. If you're using it for making something look really good fast, it doesn't matter what software you use. You're always gonna be able to find a really good final product. But if you're using it for production, if you're using it for testing your fit, if you're using it for all of these things, even pattern making as well, then I really trust Browzwear. I have seen comparison of the simulation between the two software in my whole long career, and I can tell that the good thing about Clo is that everything looks really good, quick. You don't really have to spend too much time, which is, Sophia, to answer part of your question here, designers like that. Designers like that you can design something on the avatar and then dress it, and then it really, if there is a little bit of imbalance on the pattern, you're still gonna see a good product in the simulation. In Browzwear, you're gonna see it, even if there is a difference in the length of let's say a side seam, you're gonna see a little bit of puckering if one side is longer than the other one. It's detailed, it's very detailed, and it's really fast as well. I know the mesh is different, and I don't know anything about programming, so
I'm really interested in this. I don't know the difference either, but I almost want to get like two programmers on here to show the browser Clo programmer, because like the simulation programs are very different, and that's like, how did we come up with two different like cloth simulations that like both work reasonably effectively?
Yes.
In which ways is different the mesh? Like,
well, the mesh in Browzwear is actually
it's quad.
Yes,
quads
it is.
Instead of triangles.
Yes. So when you use the grid, you can use the default is 1. So you're working everything at 1, everything is fast. What I personally do is that I start the garments default, which is 1. And then everything looks pretty good. And anything that it looks a little bit pixelated, then I lower the grid to show it at the end. And then I see me, and I'm sure that that's how you guys work too at the end.
That's the same workflow in Clo.
However, it's super fast, even with the small grid in certain patterns to simulate it. And it's easy to, you just go to the grid, change it, and then trace it again, and that's it. You don't really have to go through a long menu to do things. And I think that's the part that was a little bit challenging for me when I was learning Clo3D, is that coming from Browzwear to Clo, I saw that there are a lot of buttons, there are a lot of menus, there are menus under menus, there are a lot of things going on in my interface. So I like it, and I think it's exciting, but I'm so used to do it in a certain way that it's going to be really hard for me to go into learning another software to that extent, if that makes any sense. And I think that that's similar to what you guys think too, right? Like starting a new software is like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, I went through Browzwear. I went through all of the training, all of the indie training. Like there's like 3 different like main courses that you can do. And I did it all, and I got to the end and it was painful. Like I found like I kind of feel the same way. Like I got into Browser and I was like, everything's in a different place. Like the layout, the user interface is very different between Browser and Clo. But I generally found that they achieved the same result. I think like you have a 2D pattern and you drape it on a 3D avatar and you get an idea of what your final product is going to be when you sew it up in real life. I didn't get as far into like Browzwear to test out really the difference between the simulation in Browzwear and Clo. I think it's generally from people that I've talked to, I've heard that Browzwear is a little bit better at showing like the final simulation, like you were saying. Like Clo will ease in like 2 inches for you on a seam line if you want. And like not and it could be smooth, like if that's how you want to show it. And that comes back to what you're saying, Lisha, about just, but if you have pattern making knowledge and you know that when you finalize a pattern you have to make sure you true up the seam lines, then that's like you can get the idea of what your product looks like, but you still need pattern drafting knowledge to know like where do my notches need to be, like what are my exact measurements for this whole garment. Like that still plays a huge factor in how your final garment's going to come out. And that's probably even true for Browzwear. Like your pattern making knowledge is probably precedent to your ability to make your model in 3D
Yes,
something that's like
absolutely.
usable. And also I'm going to give credit to Clo because I did a couple of their advanced training. I did the advanced training. I did an advanced technical training, and they're always taking notes when people make comments like, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice to have like the matchup feature, which is a new one for Clo, where you can like select your 2 seam lines that are supposed to match and make sure that they are the same length." So there's a new feature that now that you can just like select those lines and make sure they match up. And like I know that in one of my advanced trainings, somebody asked if that was a feature and it wasn't available yet. And so I think Clo is taking in the information like we were talking about before, Sophia. I think they are taking in information, but they're also, I feel like they're taking in also information a lot from like the gaming world, the metaverse, like idea of things. And I think Clo is trying to walk the line of both, probably more towards like the simulation 3D side. And I think Browzwear is trying to walk the line of both like the production side and the 3D side. But I think Clo leans probably more towards like the 3D simulation looking good, and Browzwear leans more towards the technical accuracy of the product. Another program that we haven't really talked about, I know you guys both, I think both of you guys have a little bit of experience in it, is Gerber. Because this is the one, like when people really ask about pattern drafting software, like people still come back to Gerber being like the standard, like they love using Gerber. I'm seeing some faces. So let me hear your thoughts on this one. Let's start with you, Lisha. Do you have experience in Gerber, and how does it compare to Browzwear?
Okay. I have very little experience in Gerber. So when I graduated fashion school, they were just going to start teaching Gerber, and I didn't take that class. Then I have been able to see the program in different companies, and I got so bored that I couldn't do it, and it was so slow. And then I did do my training, I did do my hands-on practice, I did digitize the pattern and the click, 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 all of those things. But they really could use an interface designer for their software. I don't think that software has changed their interface in forever. I don't know. But the thing is that I skipped it because I went from drafting patterns by hand and doing, maybe digitizing and stuff like that. And I jumped all of that to 3D, which, yes, I am okay with that. But I have seen other software for pattern making, Optitex, Electra, all of those things. And I think that are really very specific. And because now I know that I can make changes in a pattern and see it in 3D, I'm going to miss that if I even try to go back to any of those software. And I say, what for? They have a 2D system. They both do, Clo3D and Browzwear. They have an avatar right there that I can see the changes that I'm making. I can balance this. I can do all this. If you know what you're doing, you just use the tool for the goal that you are, for what you're expecting, for you want to do. So
Yeah.
I personally think it's really hard to learn Gerber, and it's not really exciting.
It's way less fun.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, fair. I like that perspective. What about you, Sophia?
Basically the same. Like I'm familiar with Gerber, but I have more experience in Electra. Like I was trained in Electra and I used that consistently for 2 years straight. And the interface of Electra is even worse than Gerber. Like it's it's the worst thing ever. So, and in both softwares, you have the same problem. Like you want to do, like there are some things that are more optimized for pattern makers, yes. But usually if you want to do like something pretty easy, like slash and spread a sleeve, you have to go through like 7 different buttons and menus. Like it's very tedious. It's not user-friendly at all. Like, yeah, you end up learning, and there are some things that right off the bat are a bit optimized for pattern making that Clo or Browzwear may not be. Like you have to know maybe like, oh yeah, like I have to remember them, like to add the grain lines or whatever. But in general, and even though, for example, with Electra and Gerber, I think too, like you can, there's the main program, and then you have different modules that allow you to do things like markers, like production markers. And for example, in Clo, there's a way to do a marker, but I don't think it's super great.
Yeah,
So
especially if you want
use,
like a lot of sizes. It's
yeah.
just it's very cumbersome.
So I wouldn't use Clo to do a marker for a production pattern. But aside from that, if you just want the pattern making thing and grading, go to Clo, go to Browzwear. The interface is so much better. The things, like the way the workflow actually is so much more intuitive. It's actually similar in a way, more similar to what you would do by hand than any of those like Gerber or Electra.
The good news is that you can export the DXF pattern and use it in both software.
Yeah.
So that is at least the good news, to have some compatibility there.
Yep, that's a really good point. Yeah, and that those DXF patterns is the one thing that the industry has been able to like standardize, like DXF patterns. You can't really, the 3D sides of things don't play well with each other like anywhere. but the patterns you can, and it does a reasonable job, I found, for the most part. I've seen people complain about having problems importing DXF files, but there's ways around them. Like if the scale is wrong, you just introduce a scale box, to make sure that the receiving party can make sure that it's the appropriate scale when they bring it in. There's workarounds that I've found that have been usable.
Yes, another option that you can do is if you're working with a factory and they have a certain pattern making software, you can ask them to screenshot the window with all the export settings. And then that way you can make sure that every time that they export the pattern that works in 3D, that they follow that.
Yeah. Sometimes just like a little bit of problem solving, sharing knowledge, right? Like making sure that you understand what they need and you're able to provide them whatever the settings are.
Mhm.
Okay, you guys, we're intimates designers, and this is supposed to be an intimates podcast. So let's talk about using these programs specifically for intimates. So I'll go first. My experience in the past year has been a lot with helping Kristen and her team develop their 3D processes for the production of their patterns. And the way that we work is we develop our initial style, we go to the factory, we create a tech pack, the factory sends us the pattern, and sometimes we'll develop our own patterns if we have a block that's already close to it. And then we'll mock that up in Clo, and then we'll have a meeting with the team to discuss whether we like the style lines of this pattern. Is it meeting the design intent? We can evaluate our pattern at that point. And because we're starting with professional knowledge on pattern drafting and the way a pattern's supposed to look and the specific specs that our pattern is supposed to follow, we know the pattern's already in a reasonably good place. And then when we're fitting it, we don't really use the soft body simulation. We're fitting it as if we were fitting it on a hard mannequin. And we're able to get a lot of information out of that, like this first initial sample that's done in 3D. And that saves us one sample for sure. Boom, right there, right? At least you're saving one sample at a minimum. And what we've also found is that our products are getting better at the end because we're starting at a better place where we're not having to correct big changes. We're able to ask for, once we get to like our third sample, it's in a much better place and we can get much more nitpicky about the things that we want to correct on that pattern than we did previously before Clo was before my time, but from what I hear from the team, that's what like one of the big benefits of using Clo. And then communication with the factories and with each other on exactly what we want to see, exactly what the materials should entail and what like the width of your strap is going to be, things like that. Like you can communicate those details a lot more clearly because you have a 3D sample to provide the factory with rather than just like a 2D sketch, which is what we normally start with. So in my experience, this is how we've used it for intimates. And the reason why I think it's been so effective is because we start with such a strong pattern making resource. Like everybody on the team is very strong in pattern making. So yeah, that's my perspective on it. I'd like to hear from both of you. Sophia, why don't you tell us your experience using Clo and how you use it, and specifically where, and you can talk about like the faults too, like or the things that Clo can't achieve with intimate specifically.
I think let's talk about the cons, like the bad things first.
The cons
But,
first?
yeah, like I think we are very limited into like in 3D we are limited in two ways. In one way is the avatars that we have, and the other is the fabrics that we have available. So the avatars in Clo, first they have, until now, they have the same problem as a dress form, like they are solid. So for intimates, they don't react the way the body reacts to pressure. Now that they have the soft body feature, that is slightly better, even though the soft body simulation is not super 100% realistic, but that's helpful, like to see if a cap is digging in at the neckline or something like that. I think that's very valuable. And they still haven't they haven't provided an avatar that is more geared towards intimates in a sense of like, for example, having a wider crotch or like having the breast being able to adjust the cup size, but we can go around that by using, for example, albino avatars that I'm in love with, even though they are not perfect too, but yeah. So in that sense, I think those are the limitations, and also the fabrics, because sometimes we like, I don't have Visu scanner thing to scan my fabrics with the physical properties. So I have to go to the Clo library or the Closet website and download the thing that I think is going to be the closest to the fabric that I'm going to use in that sample. But that said, I think trying out the patterns in Clo in 3D at least saves a sample, like definitely one sample, probably even two. Like I had a client, like for example, I worked with a new swimwear brand this year. I made the patterns and I tested everything in 3D. The pattern was sent to the factory. The first sample, like we could go into production with that first sample. Like the things that we like, they weren't super complex pattern. It was swimwear, but there were some of the designs that had like ruching on the front or on the sides, and like some overlap. Like they weren't super easy. That like I would say it was like mid mid difficulty. I think that they weren't any patterns with underwires. It was everything like soft cap, but the first sample was already like good. Like the changes that we made to that first sample were more design than anything else. Like we're more like, I like the straps a bit thinner and change the color of that. Like the fit was almost perfect.
Yeah,
Like
we had the
just,
same experience
yeah.
with one of our collections this year too. Is one of the first collections that I really got to see Clo being used. And once we got our first physical samples, like Kristen was like, this is pretty close to production ready. Like we're making minor tweaks now at this point.
Yeah, so that's my experience. Like I think definitely saves you one sample, and if the designs are a bit more complex, like with more structure, underwire and things like that, it's a good idea to try that on a body also. But and also because of the comfort level, that Clo is not going to be able to tell you these panties are too uncomfortable, they
Yeah.
ride up.
Yeah, exactly. Like especially things
Yeah.
like, are you using the right thread? Is the thread itchy, or is that fabric, like, is that lace scratchy, or like these are the things that you need human feedback for.
Yeah, it's not a substitute, but
Right.
it's a great tool to
Yeah.
save time in the process, and
Mm.
especially to save waste, like in terms of sustainability. Like even if you save one sample in all of your production line, that could potentially be like hundreds of meters of fabric and like shipping times and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Lisha? Problems and benefits anything specific to Browzwear that you've heard us talk about that differs or is the same?
It's pretty similar. I think that 3D in terms of intimate is at the same, everything is at the same level right now. I agree with you. It needs to start with a professional pattern in order to test or to fit lingerie, and it is actually like that in real life as well, right? Like you need your physical fit models, and then you do some work on the albino forms in the physical form, the real life, and that's how it's we fit in the industry as well. So the fact that we can visualize a garment in 3D and make design changes, it's huge. It's saving a lot of time. It's saving a lot of samples. It's saving a lot of headaches, right? Because coming from 2D line sketches, the flat sketches, the problem is that they were not proportional. So you couldn't really visualize what you were doing. And the other benefit, to add to what you were saying, Trudy, is that you could also play with lace placement. You can play with a lot of things that you want to see the scale, you want to see the color, you want to see, how the sheerness, you can do that. In Browzwear, you can actually, and I don't know this part in Clo, but you could use certain buttons that will allow you to change the avatar to have certain types of bras. Like if you have a push-up, if you have a sports bra. So you basically shape the avatar in the shape that is gonna end up with the garment, because obviously, the avatars are not, even with the soft avatars are not gonna have the tissue and the weight and all the information that we need to fit a bra. However, if you shape the avatar as the final product, would like the final fit that you will achieve with that garment, if that makes sense, then you can have a very accurate representation of what it is. Doing any type of underwires it takes a process in Browzwear. The molded cups are not really there. You can simulate kind of a shape of a foam with a concave kind of curve, but it's never gonna be the what a real molded cup is, which is also going along with the soft body avatar if it worked. So I think that there is a lot to do still in the 3D world for intimates, but I still think that it's very useful. It's still very accurate when you use your real patterns. And then I do believe that, especially for intimates, you do need to have a real good pattern maker first, and then use the 3D as a secondary tool, but still very useful, if that makes sense.
I know it's mind blowing to me that like pattern makers know that 3D's out there. And I know that it's challenging to learn a new program. It's like it takes like a lot of time and you're probably busy, but it's just mind blowing to me that pattern makers know that there's a program out there where they can simulate their pattern and they're not like all over it. You know what I mean? Like when I was first learning pattern making and you draft your pattern and then you got to add your seam allowance and then you got to sew it up and then you got to make a change. You cut back to the pattern, like make your change by hand, draft it, add your seam allowance again, trace it all out. Like it's so time consuming. Like if I could speed that up by a gazillion and then like just get an idea of what's going to happen, like I love it.
Yes, I think it comes down to how open are you to change? How open are you to do some things in a different way? Things that you might be doing for 20, 30 years the same way. So it comes back to being open to change, to being open to innovation, to be open to try new tools, new things, and try it. You might be surprised of the results and you adopt a new way, but not everybody's open to change as you are, Trudy, and as you are, Sophia. And I agree. I mean, if you're starting a line, why not make the whole collection in 3D? Make decisions based on that. Heck, even pre-sales. Get pre-sales with your collection. And then it is another way to work. And that is the thing that it's embracing what could be done, right? It's embracing what possibilities are out there that we haven't explored, because it might be expensive to create a 3D collection if you're not using the software yourself. However, you don't need a model, you don't need a photographer, you don't need necessarily a fit model right at the beginning. You will, but not at the beginning. You don't need a technical designer to create a tech pack. You don't need so many things that would be, and you're not wasting this amount of fabric and thread and time into creating garments that you need to redo just because the waste
they go in the
wasn't in the right
garbage.
place.
Those garments just go, they get made and then they go into the garbage. Like it's
Absolutely.
crazy. Yeah.
And I have seen it in the industry, and it's so sad to see samples and samples and samples of just development that didn't get adopted and they just go to the trash. And it's thousands and thousands and thousands per season. It's insane. the amount of garments
Yeah.
that are wasted in the industry that we don't see.
Exactly. We talk about like our one sample and it sounds so small. Oh, you say one sample, one sample. It sounds like a small number, but multiply that by the entire industry and especially by like garments that like get samples and then never get made. Because
Absolutely.
you can cancel that sample based on like your 3D visual of it, right?
And I was in a company and that they overdeveloped, like, that they used to do a lot. I'm talking about hundreds of samples overdeveloped, and they would require 14 samples of each style that was not even adopted. And I asked the question, why are we asking for 14 samples of the same thing when it's not even adopted? It could easily go to the trash immediately. They're like, that's the way we've always done it. And I was like, it doesn't have to be that way. Just talk to each other. Just collaborate with each other. We're working towards a bigger objective here than it's not just a personal opinion.
It's so frustrating. And they just build that into the price of the product. Like it's not like it's just so wasteful and so unnecessary. And there's like these paths to efficiency that are available to us and accessible. And like a lot of like I feel like 3D is really coming from the ground up. Besides some of the bigger brands that are doing it, like Hugo Boss and Nike and Adidas, some of them are like really like stuck into it. But like all of the middle brands, like they're kind of starting to dabble in it, and because they're not fully in it, they're seeing a lot of like the problems that 3D is creating by trying to change their processes rather than being open to the efficiencies that I can really build into it. Because like going back to the avatars, oh yeah, I wanted to make the point. Browzwear definitely has better avatars than Clo. Like you can at least change the cup size of the Browzwear avatars, and there's a few more options for changing the parametric avatars specifically. Like you get a much more reasonable shape when you change the Browzwear avatars compared to Clo. Clo needs definitely a lot of work on that. I feel like for Clo, you really need to go out to like a third-party software to get like a good accurate avatar. Just one comparison between Browzwear and Clo I wanted to make. But I wanted to bring us back around to Lisha, your experience in the industry, because you've seen this since 2016. Sophia and I are a little bit more new to it, and I would say I'm more on the production side, and Sophia's more on like the final visualization, like the projects that you've gotten. Sophia are more on like the final visualization side. I'm interested to hear the corporate side of things, Lisha. Like, how have you seen since you started in 2016? And the big brands were using it. Like, how have you seen brands starting to adopt it?
Yeah, it depends on how would the brand use the technology. So each brand would use, or each corporation would use the software in different ways. Sometimes they were more interested on applying it in e-commerce. Sometimes they were interested on applying it to production and fitting and that process. So in order for 3D to be successful in a company, and it could be any size company, there needs to be a change in the process of doing things. And that is the difference that I see, because it's a different story that if you adopt 3D and then you want to add it to your process, then it's going to add to your day. It's going to add work to your already busy work that everybody is working overtime already. But then if you change that mentality to reverse the way you do things and then adopt 3D earlier in the process, then it would actually save time. It would actually make your life easier. If you're not resistant to the change of changing your process, you could start from a much better place. If you start with 3D, if you start with your 3D garments, you can make all the decisions you want first, early in the process, and then export that pattern and export that image, and then you would have a better sample from the beginning. You could even do all the trim down of the styles from the beginning, colorways. You can plan out your whole line and start there, and then move into the tech packs. But then the thing is that we have done things the other way around all these years, right? Because I started in the industry way earlier when we were just doing, in many companies are still doing this process where you design, you develop, you create tech packs, you send to the factory makes the garments take a while to make, and then you go to a meeting, they change everything, and then you start over. Then you're 6 weeks into the process. Then you have to continue the process that way and then do it all over again. And also, if you apply prints, this is very important to see how the print is going to look on the final garment, because Photoshop is not going to be enough. A flat sketch is not going to be enough. You have to see how the print would look in a whole PJ set, head to toe, in the same print, right?
Yeah,
So
the scale of it, the color
things,
of it, the way that it looks on the folds of the garment. Yeah.
yes, you can make decisions based on that. It's like if you got a model and a photographer, and then you made a catalog, and then you're making decisions based on that. It's the same thing, just that that garment doesn't exist. It's not made in real life, and it's not wasted, and it's quick. And to me, something that I always suggested, but it's a very difficult thing to achieve, is to get a designer and a technical designer together and create those lines together. It's incredible how difficult it was to get a person from each team to work together, because that's not the way they have done it, right? They have designs an area and technical design is another area. But then it was very successful. I did that exercise many times in different companies when I was doing demos, where I would get the designer and they just tell me your vision, tell me what you do. Okay, longer, shorter, pocket, blah, blah. And then at the end, we will both be happy, right? Because she's getting whatever her vision is, and I'm getting my pattern done in a nice way from the beginning. So it's just a matter of being open to change and to change the whole process, not just adopting the software and you start using it. And also start small. Start with a very small test run. Like start with a small category, a small team of open-minded people that want to learn it, that want to do it, and start small. And then once that you realize what works, and you decide what works and how this is going to be sustainable and effective and the best way to do it, and go over all the things that could come up, then start expanding to other categories.
And have you seen teams that have done this successfully?
Yes, many.
Yeah.
Many. And nowadays there is also another area, which is the catalogs of, we're talking now about sales, right? We were talking about production. Now we can talk about sales. You can create a B2B catalog and then sell to your clients based on that catalog. And then again, you're saving a lot of time and materials and waste and etc. And then we are not even considering the pressure and the problems that we cause to the factories, because we don't see it. We're not there. We're not even considerate to these people and the efforts they have to do when something is changed last minute, when a color is changed last minute, when something is changed because the designer was in a bad mood that day and they wanted purple instead of pink. That creates such a waste and such a stress and such a work for these factories that we don't even think about, because we're not there seeing their work. So it's really a matter of being a little bit more conscious and think about how our decisions affect others as well, because we don't work alone. No, nobody does. And then going to digital catalogs, going to e-commerce, like,
and eventually virtual try on. Once we're heading in that direction, the technology is being developed, but I mean, it starts somewhere. There was a really good Jeff Bezos was on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he talked about how the things that we're doing today are only achievable because of what people have done before us. So like Amazon would have been possible if that somebody didn't create the internet and somebody didn't create like the processes that were available to that. And I feel like I'm a part of that. And it's super exciting. Like we're like 3D is not all that hasn't achieved all the potential it can yet, but there's so much that it can do. And like us working in like how like figuring out the ways that it can work right now are going in that it's an exciting direction to think that like that's the possibility that we're bringing the future that in that direction. Better clothes that fit people better because we have more information that we can apply to like the end result is still good, well-fitting product. And we just have like simulation is like one of the most efficient avenues to getting there right now.
And I think that there are more possibilities to small designers, to starting designers, to startups, and that's something that I have done in my life as well. Not only I used to work for corporations, but now I started using 3D to create sewing patterns. Bring in the pattern that is graded, and then visualize different options, different things, you can even dress up all the size set, which is something that it's really hard to do in real life. You have to make all these garments.
Yeah, exactly. Like 12 different sizes of something. That's a lot of work.
Yes.
And I can do it in 2 hours in 3D, right?
Exactly. And you can do different laces and different colors and different things to show a beautiful end product, and then you can correct certain lines with design and stuff like that. And that's how I create my Stitch Love Studio patterns, sewing patterns, using
let's get into Stitch Love.
using Illustrator.
Can you tell us a little bit? I got to wrap up this podcast in the next 10 minutes, but can you tell us about Stitch Love, like what it is and how you create the patterns?
Yes. Well, I love making sewing patterns, and I just love the process of creating something and making the sample and then dressing it in real life. And then I also do that in 3D. So I basically do a combination. I use Illustrator as well to create I start with 3D many times, or many times I do patterns on the dress form, draping or drafting. It depends on the style. But I have different methods of my preference for pattern making. I've been doing pattern making all my life. Since I was 8 years old, I started doing classes. I started taking sewing classes, including pattern making from scratch. So I do enjoy that very much. And then I get the patterns, I scan them, put them in 3D. And then after 3D, I create different options and I correct the last little things. And then I have a contractor that does all my grading. She's an expert on that. That's all she does. And then I get the pattern into Illustrator, and then I add all the lines and all the tiles and everything that I need to do. A template. I have a template for different formats. And then I go through this whole process where my husband's a graphic designer, so he does all the covers and all the logos and all the visuals and stuff, because I'm not good at that. My brain is more technical than anything. And then we have the option to make it tiled at home or to a printed version, and we use a company to do the printing. So that's kind of the process that we follow for that. But we also have the materials to make lingerie and swimwear, elastics, laces, all of those things that are really hard to find. And then we have a dyeing facility where we dye all the materials the same color, which was one of the challenges that I had when I created my own line years ago, that I didn't proceed it because I didn't like production. I realized that I didn't want to do production. So yeah, that's how we started and how we work now.
I love it. I feel like that needs to be a whole podcast on its own. We're definitely gonna have to do like another part of this podcast, because I feel like we didn't even cover everything that I wanted to talk about. Sophia, one thing I wanted, I want to prompt this from you, if you remember it, but you have a really good trick Okay, so we were talking about doing illustrations and that we start with illustrations. And I think it's still important to start with illustrations. Like you get your ideas out, like this is the thing that we want to create. So Sophia has a good trick with her illustrations and how she uses them in Clo.
Yeah, I have that on my course, and I didn't think it was that groundbreaking, but a couple of people also told me that, oh, that's very interesting. So I when I design something, like I do the tech sketch in Illustrator, I have a dress form template that is proportionally accurate. Like actually, I did a screenshot of one of the Albanon avatars, and I traced over it, and I have a couple more, like 4 Clo3D avatars too. And so now when I do the drawing in Illustrator, it has the proportions of the avatar that I'm going to use in Clo. So when I'm going to make the pattern, I have my base pattern, like for example, a panty pattern, and I bring my sketch, my Illustrator sketch to Clo. And the sketch might have like some seam lines and like asymmetric details and stuff. So what I do is I place my pattern, my Clo pattern, on top of the sketch, and as they have the same proportions, I can very easily follow my lines for the different seam lines and the different details. And like right off the bat, they are much more closer to what I had in mind that if I had just like eyeballed that based on the sketch, like, oh, this is more or less at the middle, but not quite. And this is
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that's
it's
what I
such a smart workflow. And I don't know if you did this in your course, but another thing you can do is take that sketch and bring it into 3D window and just like make it just like it's a graphic
yeah.
image on a pattern piece, and then you just put it on and you can just like visualize really quickly like are the proportions right before I even start making this pattern, like is this something that I want to like spend time developing further.
Yeah.
I think it's a super cool trick. And that's the kind of thing, like that's the thing that like starting to explore in 3D just allows you to go down these paths that you wouldn't have, you just can't do in the 2D, like in the 2D space. It allows you just to really explore your creativity a lot more in and but also like the technicality of your design. Like, does this design make sense when I put it on a proportional body? Um, okay, you guys, I gotta wrap it up. Final words, final thoughts. Oh, wait.
Um,
So no, I forgot. I always end the podcast by asking what's your favorite part of the job. Let's say, let's call it 3D. What's your favorite part of working in 3D? And what's your least favorite part of working in 3D?
my favorite part of working on 3D is, oh God, is everything. I love seeing how I can start from a pattern and end up with a garment. I do love making lingerie and swimwear, and I just really like everything about it. I can't pinpoint one specific task that I like, but I'm really fast at sewing. Like I can get a pattern and it could have 100 pattern pieces, and then I am super quick at sewing. I guess that I enjoy that because I can even hear, I can listen to podcasts or a book while I'm doing this work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
no, so
my
least favorite, yeah.
least favorite would be to scan under wires and go through a whole physics process. Um, yeah, it's got to be that kind
Yeah,
of stuff.
another whole podcast we should talk about. 'Cause we should have talked about that specifically, like how we do it in Clo and how we do it in Browzwear. So next podcast.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sophia, best and
Uh,
worst.
I feel like that I actually answered that question in some of my earlier podcasts. Like your listener must be like super tired of hearing me, but I think it changes. So I think now my favorite part of like of working in 3D, is the freedom that you have. Like you can do 100 variations of the same thing in an hour. Like you can change, like, oh, let's go, like do a higher neckline, lower neckline, like put a seam down the back. Like you can play around and change colors and fabrics, and it's super, like it's like playing with dolls. but better.
Paper dolls, yeah.
So it's the best. And my least favorite right now, like in this very moment in time, is when there's something that doesn't work as it should. Like I had an issue with the rendering part in Clo, and like I have to say, like the people in Clo, they are super nice. Like I contacted them about that, and like we went back and forth several emails, and the issue is still not fixed. But at least like I know like they have listened to my concern, they are looking for a solution. But it's very frustrating when it's like, yeah, like I've done everything right on my end, but it's not
Yeah,
working.
it's not you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found the same. Chloe is very good at because they love it too. They love the problem solving. They want to know what where the problems are in their program, and they want to like make it better. I've found that. I found that I really get that feeling from them when I do approach them with things. For me, it's my favorite part is the learning, is my ability to like test out like ideas, like is this the right, pattern change to make, or is like if I want to manipulate the pattern, is this the right way to do it? And again, like having some resources like other pattern drafting experts out there to say like, do you think that this is going to work? So it's just made like I feel like it's really accelerated my knowledge of pattern drafting. And my least favorite is what's my least favorite part of it? I think
You don't
it's
have one.
no, you know what it is? You know what it is for
You
me?
love everything.
It's the fact that I feel like why doesn't everybody see it the way that I see it? Like why isn't everybody super excited about it? And I'm spending time like I know like it's a very self-centered way to approach it. And I'm trying to understand like why other people don't adopt it. And there's lots of valid reasons out there. But that's for my own personal struggle. It's like why doesn't everybody love this the way that I do? All right, you beautiful ladies. Thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me today. We're gonna have to do it again. There's definitely lots more topics that we can dive into, and I've noted them down. So we will definitely have this again. Thank you for being here, and I will catch you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trudy.
Thank you, Trudy.